I usually speak to people who are creatives and who are in the design field, but Conrad is slightly different. Conrad, would you be so kind and introduce yourself to the world?
Hey everyone, yeah. So how different am I? I am technically a banker and an accountant, albeit hopefully you'll find I'm a fairly unusual one as we go on. So yeah, I started my career in a very meandering way. In fact, I didn't get my first permanent job until I was in my late 20s, about 26, 27. And that was in banking. So in the city where you see all those pictures when the stock market is crashing. And then I had what I call my midlife crisis. I decided I wanted to do something more ambitious with my life. And I founded a startup in the fintech, the financial technology sector, which is actually one of London's. So London is now a thriving centre of fintech. But back then there was a few hundred of us, and I was one of them. Founded a fintech business. I was a sole founder, a business called Funding Options, which has now been bought by a larger fintech. But I scaled that business for almost 10 years, 7 or 8 years. And now I'm on the leadership team of a bank, but a very new bank, a 5-year-old bank, which, believe it or not, is the fastest growing startup in Europe.
I mean, that's amazing in itself. Like your whole history is amazing. I have a question for you. When it comes to starting your ambitious new venture, did you do it with the intent of exiting? Like, what is the mindset of a person who starts this kind of a business?
Yeah, I mean, the straight answer is yes. So I've thought a lot during my life and my career around what kind of my motivations are. And I've kind of concluded I'm never going to be Mother Teresa. I'm not going to be living in poverty to help other people. But at the same time, I do have some sense of moral responsibility and a bit of a moral. I just need a bit of affluence in my life. I'm not very good at being poor. So as I've begun to mature and be more thoughtful in my career choices, I try and find things where I think there's an alignment between my ability to have an affluent and successful career, and also things that I think are broadly a social good. And for me, that's turned out to be the SME segment. So I've spent the last 15 years or more actually in the SME segment. So the customers that I've been serving in many different forms have been ordinary small businesses. If you want to understand a customer of Allica Bank, where I am at the moment, if you go to a town you've never been before and you accidentally drive into an industrial estate, have to do a U-turn, and there's those slightly shabby, gritty, small factories, warehouses, and they are literally hidden away, right? They put big green trees, evergreen trees, to hide them away. These kind of shameful industrial estates. Those are our customers. But let me tell you, if you take those industrial estates out of that ordinary small town, then that town will basically die. So kind of think helping those small businesses, which frankly the big banks in the UK are terrible at doing. They are very unenthusiastic about helping small businesses. It's something where I've kind of found I've been able to build a hopefully very quite successful career. But at the same time, I think, what I think, I don't go to bed worrying about whether what I've done is morally right. I think it's a good thing to do. So that's how I kind of thought about these things.
You were talking about having affluence and success. What does that actually mean to you?
I'm a very independently minded person, so I kind of hate um, being beholden to other people. I would have very low tolerance of, frankly, a rude or abusive boss. And so for me, it's above all else about freedom. They have a very vulgar term in the west coast of America. They call it off money, which I believe the last time I checked a few years ago was $7 million. It's basically the amount of money at which you don't have to put up with shit from anyone, right? Let's be clear. If for whatever reason I ended up very rich with tens of millions of dollars, with once of that, I don't currently have tens of millions of dollars. But if I did, what I would not do is move to Monaco and then spend the rest of my life thinking that somebody else has got a big yacht than me, right? I live on the south coast of England. I'd probably go to an ordinary marina, get myself an ordinary boat, and live an ordinary life. So that's kind of how I think about it. For me, it's affluence and the ability to choose what you do in life.
Mm. Can you define ordinary for me? It's come up a few times now.
I think if I had more money and less commitments, kids and stuff, I think I would still have the same group of friends and do the same things, like go and watch my local football team. They're awful. I'm an awful fan. I would just live an ordinary life. If there's one thing I would do if I had more freedom, financial freedom from kids, it's probably that I would migrate south every winter. a bit like a bird that dig rats. So I have to say I like this country generally, but I despise January and February. So I think there will be a point in my life, I hope, where I pack the dog in the and lots of things in the car, the kitchen sink in the car, and head south on the Portsmouth ferry until the winter is over. But in the end, I think when I say ordinary, I don't really have any particular aspirations to live a rich life.
If we think about the ordinary businesses that you're supporting through Allica Bank and also probably funding options, they were the same, similar.
Yeah, they were the same.
Yeah. If we think about those and the way that you describe them, that if they would leave the city, village, or town, wherever they are, the place would not survive. That sounds to me to be extraordinary. So how do you find the extraordinary in the ordinary?
I think I mean, my kind of understanding of the SME segment and well, I would call it the rather than ordinary, the real economy is what I call it. In America, they have a wonderful phrase. They say Main Street instead of Wall Street. So Main Street, every town in America has a Main Street where everyone drives their cars up and down, has small malls and stuff. So Main Street instead of Wall Street. I think we don't really have the same conception in the UK, and it really harms us.
Mm.
Our policymakers, our regulators, when they think about financial services, they're thinking about those high-earning people in the city. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, we're super lucky to have those high-earning people because they pay for the NHS. However much, if you love the NHS, however much you hate them, you should love them. But the reality is they aren't the ones that kind of prop up the core economy, the real economy outside London, albeit London's tax base does prop up the rest of the country. So when you unpick it, there's about 500,000 firms in the UK that are the core of that real economy. So they represent so there's millions of SMEs, just to be clear, but the vast majority of SMEs are really small. And generally speaking, they're kind of, the person running them kind of pays for themselves. So in other words, they eliminate the need for a job elsewhere, but there's only about 10% of them, of mid-sized SMEs, are the ones that really prop up local economies. So each small town will have a few dozen of these firms. Maybe a family-run hotel, it may be a family-run restaurant, but equally it could be a small factory or warehouse on the outskirts of the town. But they are absolutely crucial. They're a third of the economy. And we find at Allica Bank, those are our core customer base. We have a higher market share or penetration the further you go from London. So what does that tell us? It means that in London, because the banks are very active here and have lots of presence here, the need for Allica isn't great. But as you go further and further away, and as the banks are pulling back and shutting down branches in small remote towns, the need for Allica is kind of growing. So I mean, there's many places I could have spent it's not the only place you can spend your career and do something useful in the world. But it just happened to be where I ended up, and where I kind of found that happy place of something where I can build a successful career and at the same time feel like, at the very least, I'm not bad for the world.
Absolutely. How did you end up in the banking space?
Well, I said that I didn't get my first permanent job until I was 26 or 27,
Yeah.
actually. And that was primarily because I was traveling.
Okay.
I just wanted to go and see the world. And I was going to go and see the world in 6 months, and it turned out I was a really slow traveler. So I needed more than 4 months. So I would happily spend like a month sitting in a village in the Himalayas if I thought it was a nice place. So you're not going to see much of the world in 6 months at that pace. So I'd spent a lot of my 20s traveling without a particular plan. And I got sat down by a fierce auntie when I was about 25, 26, and she told me you need to get a qualification, basically. The only way I could maintain my then standards of living was to study accountancy in an investment bank. Investment banks, for those that don't know, are the things you see on the news when the stock market is tanking, where there's lots of high-paid people. So I qualified as an accountant within one of those banks. I'm very glad I'm qualified as an accountant. I consider it almost like a driving license for running a company. You really shouldn't run a company unless you understand financials, but a surprising number of people, senior people in large companies that really understand the financials. I'm glad I studied accountancy, but I wouldn't claim to have enjoyed studying accountancy or indeed enjoyed that job. So I kind of resolved during my time doing that strategy sounded interesting. I've always been quite a creative thinker, and that's one reason I'm on the podcast. I tend to see things and think about things that other people don't. To the extent I have a strength professionally, it's probably that. Um, and strategy seems an interesting thing to do. That seems to be an interesting part of business. Yeah. And I managed to find myself within one of those investment banks, a role with strategy in the title. I'm not sure if it's doing much strategy, but the point is it gave me that title, and then I got headhunted into a proper strategy role in one of the big banks. So I was for a number of years in the corporate strategy team of a big bank. So to be clear, that's the people, that's elite, relatively elite, small group of people who basically support the board and leadership team. You know, which countries we're going to enter, which companies we're going to buy. So quite big stuff. For example, I spent a few months in Johannesburg buying a bank down in South Africa. So that was kind of my transition where I found a career, probably the most important job I had because I found something that I was good at. Yeah. And that kind of strategy strength has, I've strategied one of my responsibilities now at Allica Bank. And I'd like to think that our success shows that we've probably got the strategy right.
I mean, I think you've done remarkably well. Something you said is going to trigger a lot of the listeners here. You said that if people don't understand their finances, they shouldn't really run a company. And most of the people that I work with, they are creative entrepreneurs, they are designers, they are web designers, architects, and all sorts. They just want to do the creative bit. What would you say to them so that they can become maybe a little bit more financially literate? Or how would you respond to them when they go, oh no, but I don't understand it, but I'm still operating 5 years on or 10 years on?
Yeah, I mean, clearly not everyone needs to qualify as an accountant. I mean, I use the analogy of a driving license, and I'd stand by that, by the way. People can drive without driving licenses, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. Um, and I want to be clear here. If you're a one-person business, so you're a freelancer, a contractor, then your financial management is really simple, right? Invoices go out, money hopefully comes in, and you spend lots of time fretting about the difference between the two. If you want to build a bigger business, and actually, this is a good insight into Allica's strategy. We find that somewhere between 5 and 10 employees, depending on the sector, the business just becomes too complex to be a
Mm.
kind of like considered a micro business. And it's when they've transitioned is when they become an Allica customer, they need Allica. And I think the financial management is a good example there, right? The moment you've got a meaningful payroll, for example, it really is important you understand the difference in profit and cash flow. Right? They're different things, yeah. And cash flow is the one that will kill you. Yeah. So you could be making profits in your hairs, but cash, if you don't have the cash to pay your staff, you're done. So I think it's important, but you clearly don't need to be a qualified accountant. If you get to a size where your business is, let's say, 20 people, the answer is to get a finance professional into your business. So in other words, if you don't consider that your strength, that's not what makes you great professionally. Get a finance professional. There's multiple ways to do that without a full-time person. So you can get some modern accountancy firms will kind of like do a lot more than just sign off your accounts once a year. So they'll come in and do more work for you. But equally, there's what's called fractional CFOs who work across a portfolio of companies.
For someone who's running a small business, so most of the people that I work with, they tend to be up to 5, 6 people, but they will have hired just a creative team. They don't build out anything else. So they won't have, they will most likely have an accountant to file their accounts. But for a business like that, and when it comes to money, is there any particular advice that you would give smaller businesses? They're obviously smaller than what Allica Bank would work with. Is there any particular advice when it comes to money, cash flow, profit, or anything like that that immediately comes to your mind? You're like, I've seen this problem arise time and time again. Be mindful of this.
Yeah. So um, if you're an accountant, you're kind of taught that there's kind of a trinity of your profit and loss, your cash flow, and your balance sheets. And in a very technical way, the three things must align. Yeah, it's the magic of accountancy is that mathematically they must all align. Balance sheets are very complex, and unless you're looking at the risk of and working with another client, you probably shouldn't overthink the balance sheets. In the end, what really matters is how much cash you've got sitting in your bank account, and you don't need your balance sheets to tell you that. The really important thing to understand is the difference between profit and loss and cash flow, because they are two different things. So if you're in a creative industry, you're probably B2B. In other words, you're probably serving other businesses. And if you are taking on a large project, you're going to ramp up resources, bring in freelancers, contractors, you're going to spend quite a lot of money, and then you invoice the client for the work. and making 30 days invoice, and they're probably going to pay you around day 45. That gap is what kills businesses. And the horrible reality is that high growth businesses, in other words, successful ones, are particularly vulnerable because they ramp up the costs very quickly and the cash doesn't come through. So understand the difference between cash and profit, or cash and revenue. It's super important. When you raise an invoice, that's revenue. When you get paid, that's cash. Cash is what you need in the business to survive. That's really important. And related to that, you need to be very good at credit control. So the discipline of chasing invoices. And I suspect that most creative entrepreneurs, or certainly a large number of them, are awkward about chasing invoices because they're nice people. Yeah. And it's all about the relationship. The reality is you do need to have an element of discipline, which is that if you've done work for somebody and they owe you money, it's perfectly reasonable for you to ask robustly for the money. And the discipline of credit control, of sending statements, reminders, etc., is super important. Statistically, it's been shown to have your money comes in meaningfully quicker if you do credit control properly. Another way to think about it is the person who's paying you late is probably struggling a bit themselves. They're going to pay the person who's on them the most. Yeah. So that discipline of credit control, there's some really good tools that automate that for you. And look at that. Is my advice.
Yeah, I like that. And everyone listening here really needs to hear that. I cannot stress it enough. I want to pivot our conversation to the creative side. Allica Bank has an interesting brand. Were you involved with that, or did you help? Did you help shape it, or was it existing the way it is now?
No, so I mean, firstly, I'm not responsible for the name, but the brands, which
Yeah.
obviously is a lot more than the name. Very, 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 very much so. So we did a rebrand or brand refresh over the last couple of years to where we are now. So I am the accountable executive for marketing. So to the extent there is a CMO, it's me. I just don't happen to have that title. So yeah, heavily involved. So at the core of our brand identity is our orange bowler hats.
Mhm.
For those that are watching this, there's one behind me. So we have an orange bowler hat as our brand identity, and I'll talk about the history behind that in a second. But fundamentally, the idea for that is our customers, a typical Allica customer, the owner-manager of an established business, they would typically be towards the end of their careers, maybe late 40s through to early 60s. So for them, the concept of a bowler hat being associated with banking is it's very much baked in there. By the way, I was doing an event last night, and nobody in the audience understood that bowler hats and banking were they were all Gen Z, and they had no idea. So in 20 years' time, we'll probably actually fix our brand.
Yeah.
But for our customer base, a bowler hat is associated with banking, and a particularly sort of staid, traditional type of banking, but also a banking where you actually knew your bank. Yeah, when you had Captain Mannering in the bank branch. For anyone who's not British, that's a sitcom character, but a traditional banker who's in the branch and knows the people in the town. So our brand identity is, well, our tagline is how business banking used to be, just better. So the bowler hat symbolizes the good things about old kind of banking, but the orange is that we're fresh and different because we have modern technology. So that's kind of the idea behind it. And it really has cut through. In terms of B2B branding, generally speaking, most organizations are too conservative about their branding. They kind of think we need to be functional and simple. The reality is the number one driver of success in B2B branding is likability, and our hat is likable. Our customers love it. Accountants love it. Because it's likable, it's a bit fun, but also a bit serious. And that's what we're trying to do with our brand.
Did you hire an external agency to do the branding for you?
Yes, we did. There's a bit of a history there. So they're the same agency that I had do some work for me in the company I founded before. So I read this article by somebody on LinkedIn talking about an unrelated thing called category creation. How modern companies create a new category and then dominate it. So Salesforce created the category of online CRM and came to dominate it. And the market share of category kings, as they're called, is growing over time. And I was really fascinated by this article. And for the first time in my career, I reached out to a consultant and said, hey, do you mind coming and doing some work for us? I've never done that in my life. Usually avoid them like the plague. Anyway, so this person comes in and they spent a couple of hours with a leadership team and said, look, I'll come back in a couple of weeks with some thoughts. And he came back in a couple of weeks. He said, look, I'm doing myself out of a job here, but you don't need me. I've talked to your leadership team. They seem to know what they're doing. They have a clear strategy. You don't need someone like me. He said, you know what you need, Conrad? And I said, no. He said, I couldn't remember the name of a company when I was thinking about you in the car the other day. You're just boring. Yeah. Yeah. You don't need me. You need a brand agency. Yeah. You're just effing boring.
Nice.
Not me, but you meant
Yeah,
that
yeah.
company. I hope. Anyway, so I hunted down the agency that had done work for a company in our world that was just killing everyone and becoming a unicorn. Hunted down the agency and reached out to the founder of that agency. Um, and he sat down with me and he did something I've never come across in marketing before since he told me the truth. He basically says, look, Conrad, London's the brand agency capital of the world. There's 100 agencies in London that can do this or as good as we are. He said, in the end, whether a brand campaign is successful or not comes down to one thing, whether the customer is bold, whether they have courage. Yeah. Because we're going to ask you to be bold. Yeah. Um, and I thought about this and thought, well, okay, I can be bold. Yeah. So yeah. And that led to a successful brand refresh for the company I previously founded, which really did cut through. And by the way, we had this kind of mission statement that came up with, and it talked about our customers and it had a wonderful phrase that people kept quoting back to me. The mission statement was on the About Us page for our website. And it talked about how our customers are not perfect, small business is not perfect. But without that scruffy pub on the corner, your cult community would not be the same. And that really resonates with people, that our customers are ordinary and gritty. So yeah, I brought in the same agency to do, I suggested to my team, same agency to do the rebrand of Allica. So they came up with a hat. But for the avoidance of doubt, right, by banking standards, our rebrand was quite bold. Right? It's not an ordinary tone of voice or identity for a bank. So I am proud that I signed it off, but I wouldn't claim that it was my intellectual capital. And I've got an amazing marketing team, and 90% of the credit is for them rather than me. But I did at least my pen didn't waver. I signed it off, and it's been very successful.
Amazing. A lot of my clients are dying to work with companies like yours or bigger companies where there is, it's hard to get to the CMO. It's hard to get a foot in the door. As someone who could possibly hire other, external contractors, what's your process? How do you make a decision on who to work with?
Yeah, so I need to be really careful answering this question because I have my own way of doing that. And there's also how most large organizations do it, and they're quite different. So let me just unpick that a bit. So I've concluded that it's kind of an obvious thing, but most companies don't do this. I hate being a small client of a supplier. And that will be true of an agency through to most tech providers. The number of times I've seen, frankly, my colleagues at Allica make the same mistake, which is get promises lots of things by a big name provider in what's called the pre-sales team, the elite team. And then afterwards, as soon as the contract is signed, basically they disappear off the pitch and you get the B team, right? So if you're going to work with a big supplier, a big name supplier, you better be a big client. Yeah. So I've kind of almost baked this into the way we do things. We don't do that at Allica. Or to put it another way, if you're going to work with a big name supplier, you basically just take exactly what they have off the shelf. In other words, don't convince yourself that they're actually going to follow through on the promises they make before you sign the contract about things they're going to change. So, for example, we have some technology providers when we're very happy with the off-the-shelf thing, we just accept the limitations. We don't pretend that they're going to do special stuff for us. So when I'm looking for suppliers, I want to be an important client, and ideally the most important client. And that importance can manifest in a number of ways. It can be that you're literally their biggest revenue source. And that means basically they will bend over backwards. But also a reference from Allica, testimonial, case study is really, really powerful, right? People care what Allica does, especially in our industry, because we are really putting the willies up the incumbents, right? And they've never seen anything like us that have come, do things so much better than they do in our world. So people care about decisions we make. And if somebody delivers for me, I will take the time to give them a proper case study, testimonial, do reference calls, all those things.
Nice.
So my philosophy, it's self-interested, right? It's not altruism. And I want them to feel value in the relationship, and then they will try hard and keep trying hard. So my philosophy, my perfect supplier in the creative sector is somebody who was a top tier A player in a big name that is now spun off on their own. Yeah. Or with 2 or 3 people in a network, one of those increasingly common kind of bonded networks, but not the same company. I want elite people that have spun off. And then I don't have to pay the overhead for the fancy offices and the fancy brand and all the bureaucrats and PowerPoint monkeys they've got in these big companies. And I will get their full attention. Yeah. So that's the perfect supplier for me. Those in the creative sector have been around as long as I have, will remember the early days of Old Street, for example. Back then, the reason Old Street became fashionable was because people spinning off from creative agencies couldn't afford to have an office where they were currently working, typically in
Mm.
the Holborn area. So they kind of made a positive element of the fact that Old Street was such a different shabby shithole at the time. Frank still isn't like either. And they basically kind of moved into these old factories and warehouses, and that was kind of like, we're new and we're modern, right? That's how Old Street came about, right? People making a virtue of the fact that they couldn't afford to be in Farringdon or something like that, where all the other agencies were. That's my kind of perfect supplier. But I am not normal in that respect, which is why most organizations, people in large organizations, they are more focused on the downside risks of making a bad decision than they are on the upside risks of making a good decision. So it's one of the great challenges of large organizations is that all the people who are capable of doing great things will move on. The people who stay
Mm.
around are the ones that focus on minimizing downsides. So they will make decision by committee. And even if they choose a great provider, they're still going to come up with a decision that's too conservative to cut through, like branding, for example. Because in the end, there'll always be someone that's like, oh, this might backfire. Yeah. We had a couple of theses as to why the orange hat would backfire. I won't say them because I don't want to create a problem for myself, but they were real theses. And we had to kind of like think hard. Can we get ourselves over this? Can we take this? Yes, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, you have to be brave to succeed. They are safety first. Yeah. Think from their perspective, they've stuck it out in this large organization. They're not capable people. They're not capable of greatness. Their entire focus is trying not to get fired. Yeah. If they do
Yeah.
something amazing for the company, they'll get an extra 10 grand of their bonus. If they do something bad for the company that makes a big senior executive look bad, they lose their job. Yeah. So they focus on minimizing the downside. So how can you cut through in that really conservative environment? I think word of mouth, recommendation, all these things really matter. I get approached every day by people selling me software development services on LinkedIn, for example. The reality is, what's the chances that me as a bank executive are going to work with a firm I've never heard of before? They are zero. Yeah. They are literally
Mhm.
zero. Yeah. There's not a scenario that would happen. If I need developers, I'm going to reach out to my network and say, who can I trust? Yeah. For people I've worked with before and find out where they are now. Yeah. So you need to understand that safety first mentality. You need to understand the questions they're going to ask. They're going to ask you some really weird questions. They're going to ask you about your child slavery policy, right? That's because they have to. Yeah. So you may be, 10 bearded hipsters in Shoreditch, but you still need to demonstrate you don't have child slaves.
Okay. Just for every listener who doesn't know what Old Street is, it has been described a little bit, but it was a hipster area. Now it's all tech, isn't it? I've been away from London for about 8 years and it's
Yes.
completely
Yeah,
changed.
it's called Silicon Roundabout, which is a kind of in a very British self-joking thing. Right? We've got Silicon Valley, we've got Silicon Roundabout because we have this horrible roundabout in the middle of Old Street. But it's the tech center of London, and London has turned into a surprisingly successful tech center. In the last 10, 15 years, it kind of came out of nowhere.
You're open to say what you think, which I appreciate. Well, how did you get to that point where you feel like you can just speak your mind? Because you do,
Yeah.
or you seem to be.
I just don't see the point of doing something like this if you're not going to give you a genuine perspective on the world. I'm lucky enough to be a point in my life where I don't have to think about outside this so much, right? And I don't have to think about how this is going to play. So the reality is, right, if I think it's useful to the listeners to be honest,
Yeah,
and very often honesty is telling people hard facts. Yeah.
yeah,
And actually something that really winds me up is when people don't share hard facts. I very often I get startup founders reaching out to me and they're kind of like, oh, I've been speaking to so-and-so big bank or something. And then they seem to be really enthusiastic. And I'm like, well, I just asked them a string of questions and I'm like, they're just stringing you along, right? They are
mm,
paid to make you feel happy, but you're basically in petting zoo. You're not in a real situation. And on the one hand, you feel like an absolute dick to be telling people hard facts, but they need to hear the hard facts because they're going to waste their lives and possibly lots of money along the way. So I'm very English by background, so having hard conversations and telling people hard facts is not natural to me, if you want to be blunt. But I've come in my career to realize that it's a necessary evil, and there's an element of cruel to be kind. For example, exiting an underperformer, right? You're not doing someone a favor if they're failing in the job and you keep them on. Yeah, so even something as hard as exiting somebody is the right thing to do, not just for you, but also for them. But we as English people, English people like me, we really struggle with that. But I've kind of got over it. I hope I'm not like that in my personal life, by the way, or my professional life. That is very much the person I've become.
But wouldn't it be refreshing in the personal life as well?
I don't know. There's a certain magic about England, right? That we are, and we're losing that magic, to be clear. That kind of civility, famously the queuing, right? We almost queue for fun, right? And you go to countries where queuing is not a thing, and it's just kind of like, I don't want to live in a society where people don't like naturally think they're ahead of me in the queue. They got here first. It's their turn. Yeah, I don't want to live in that society. And so I think it's something. On this topic, there's an amazing document. You can Google it. It's called Google Netflix Culture Deck. So Netflix, like the video streaming Culture Deck. They wrote this amazing document internally about their culture, which has just become legendary in startup circles. And it talks about their kind of expectations in terms of culture and people management. And one of the things they say, I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but they basically say many organizations talk about themselves as a family. We're not a family. We are a high-performing sports team.
Oh,
So, in a family, you don't fire your nephew for being a bit lazy, right? They're still your family. Netflix say we're not a family. We're a high-performing sports team. And what does a high-performing sports team do if someone's not quite up to it? They replace that person, and that person goes off to perhaps a slightly less successful career, but probably something that's more suitable for their level. In my personal life, I very much hope I still think of the world as a family. In my professional life, I've come to believe that it is about sports
mhm.
team.
I actually read this one. I couldn't remember the title of it, but as you mentioned, like, oh, I read this article, or if
You can
maybe someone
literally
else
get the whole
paraphrased it,
PDF.
who
I mean,
knows?
it's just, it's awash with really things that when you think about them are so obvious, but most organizations don't think in those terms. Uh, and
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's certainly influenced how I think about things because in the end, right, there are tons of places to go and be if you see your job as just turning up and getting money and just to the avoidance of doubt, I don't see that's wrong. Yeah, I kind of slightly envious people who kind of take the money and don't care a huge amount about what they do for 50 hours a week, but that's not me, right? Um, you know, Allica last year was the fastest growing company in the UK. That's 5 million companies, right? That's a 1 in 5 million, right? If you're not driven, don't come to Allica. Yeah. And if you don't want to,
Yeah.
it's like joining Man City or Real Madrid, right? The expectation is that you are here to try and achieve something incredible. But I have complete respect for people for whom that's not their thing. But people who delude themselves they want that, and that's just silly.
What would you say is the main cause for the fast growth that you've had at Allica?
I'd say it's two things. One is strategy, and the other is culture. We're now 750 people, and the discipline of making sure that you don't lose what made you great is always a challenge, but it's something I personally spend a lot of time on, a lot of time thinking about, and occasionally aggravating about. But in the end, there's a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's kind of true, but it's also good to get the strategy right as well.
The conversation flowed differently than I would have imagined because of the tech problems. But I'm so grateful for the responses, your candor. Is that the right word? I'm trying to think of what that actually means. English is not actually my first language.
Yes, this is
Yeah,
the word I think.
yeah. What did you say? It is a
Yeah, right word.
excellent. And normally I say if people want to connect with you, but I don't know if you want people to connect with you. How can
Um,
people connect with Allica Bank?
well, we're Allica.bank. So
Yes.
if you're looking for a bank if you're a business of a certain scale, we're not ideal for a micro business, a one person
Mhm.
business. It's much better options. If you're a business of a certain scale, I'd like to think we are the best option, genuinely. That's Allica.bank. Me personally, yeah, I've actually locked down my LinkedIn, so you have to know my email address. But you know what? If you bother to go all the way through this podcast, which is probably a good half an hour, then you can have my email address. Conrad.Ford@Allica.bank. That's the magic key to unlock my LinkedIn.
Amazing. I think Allica does. The reason I obviously met you is because you were part of Ideas Fest and you're going to be there as well. So I suppose people could also find you at different events. You said you were
Yeah, so
at India.
well, as it stands, I'm not meant to be at Ideas Fest, but I need to look into that. Actually,
Okay.
the reason is the Ideas Fest team run the Great British Entrepreneurs Awards, which is a huge program to display Great Britain's businesses, ordinary businesses. And we are proudly the headline sponsor of that. So, and I genuinely mean proudly, it's one of the best things we've done actually from a marketing perspective to get involved, because it's so aligned to what we believe in. And actually, every year I get to stand up on stage so far and give a speech, a brief speech, by the way. Yeah, the funny story is the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, which you're talking about 20,000 entrants every year. It's a big deal. I, in my past life, was actually a regional winner of the GBE year, and I got to the national finals, but I didn't win.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I like to say, I now pay to be on stage. I pay to be on the stage of the events by being a sponsor. Yes.
Any way you can get there, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But
Conrad,
maybe I will be at I Did Best. I keep hearing about it. Maybe I need to go.
yeah. Well, I'll be there. I will have a booth and I'll be attending, so that'd be exciting. Yes, I decided to, have a presence. I'm like, oh, where can I do that? And a lot of people were saying they had such a great time there. I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do that then. So that's
Right, I'm
my
going to go at popular.
I have to plan it. I still haven't planned what I want to do. I want to do some sort of activation because that's like my thing. Um, but I still don't know what that will be. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of The Creative Flight. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I invite you to leave a review. It really helps more creators find the show. For more insights and behind the scenes content, you can follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn. You can also check out my resources on ivmalik.com. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep creating, keep pushing those boundaries, and keep taking flight.